At my mother's 75th birthday cookout, my husband held up the keys to my late father's truck and announced that we were giving it to a young man I barely knew. Then Scott looked at me in front of 30 relatives and friends and said, "Beth, tell Eli what your dad always said about keeping a good machine on the road." I had not agreed to give away the truck. I had not discussed giving away the truck. And the 21-year-old standing beside Scott was already crying, as if the decision belonged to everyone except me. The truck was a meadow green 1971 Ford F-100 that my father, Frank Mercer, had bought when he was 28. He drove it to work at a water treatment plant for more than 3 decades, taught my younger brother how to change a belt beside it, and picked me up from the hospital in it after my daughter Maya was born. When Dad died 3 years earlier, the probate papers transferred the truck to me because my brother lived in Boston and had no place to keep it. It was not worth a fortune. The appraisal for the estate had been just under $19,000, and it needed more work than that number suggested. Its value was in the dents Dad refused to smooth out and the coffee-colored ring on the dashboard where he used to set a metal thermos. Scott knew all of that. He had been married to me for 25 years. He had stood beside me when the tow truck brought the Ford to our garage, put both hands on my shoulders, and said we would take our time deciding what to do with it. For almost 2 years, taking our time meant putting a cover over it and checking the battery every few months. I could drive a manual transmission. Dad had taught me when I was 16. What I could not do was sit behind that wheel without hearing his last voicemail in my head. The one where he asked if I wanted to take the truck to breakfast on Sunday. He died on Saturday night. Scott never mocked me for that. At least I had believed he didn't. About 8 months before Mom's birthday, he suggested joining a volunteer program run through the automotive department at Franklin County Community College. Students helped owners of older vehicles with supervised restoration work, and the owners paid for parts. Scott had always liked engines, and I was relieved that he wanted to make the Ford roadworthy without pushing me to drive it. That was how I met Vanessa Reed, the program coordinator, and her son, Eli, who was finishing a diesel technology certificate. Vanessa was 46, easy to talk to, and quick to make herself useful. The first time she came to our house, she brought a clipboard, photographed the rust around the rear wheel wells, and explained which work students could do and which work needed a licensed shop. Eli was quiet, broad-shouldered, and careful around the truck. He called it Mr. Mercer's Ford even after I told him he could just say Frank's truck. I saw Vanessa only twice after that. Scott handled the Saturday sessions because I worked every other weekend as an occupational safety coordinator at a packaging plant outside Columbus. When I asked how the restoration was going, he showed me pictures of a cleaned carburetor, a repaired bench seat, and Eli sanding one of the steel wheels. There was nothing secretive in the way he presented it. If anything, I thought the project had given him a purpose at a time when our marriage had become too organized. We were 51 and 53. Maya was 24 and living 90 miles away. Our mortgage was nearly paid down, our calendars synced automatically, and most of our disagreements involved groceries or whether Scott's mother should still be driving at night. We were not passionate in the way we had been at 30, but we ate dinner together, took a cabin trip every October, and still reached for each other in bed. If someone had asked me that morning whether my marriage was good, I would have said yes and meant it. Mom's birthday was supposed to be simple. She wanted grilled chicken, my sister-in-law's potato salad, and one sheet cake with no jokes about fire permits. Maya came early to hang paper lanterns. Scott spent most of the morning moving between the driveway and the detached garage, saying he was arranging a surprise. I assumed he had finished enough of the Ford to start it for Mom. Around 3, a line of unfamiliar cars appeared at the curb. Vanessa arrived in a yellow dress with Eli and 4 people from the restoration program. Scott greeted her with a hand at the small of her back, but it lasted less than a second, and I filed it under the kind of thing you notice only after you know what it meant. He told me the students had helped with the surprise. I thanked them, offered lemonade, and went back to helping Mom open cards. At 4:15, Scott tapped a spoon against his glass and called everyone toward the driveway. The Ford was parked outside the garage with its paint polished and a blue ribbon stretched across the hood. Mom covered her mouth when she saw it. For one clean second, I thought Scott had done something beautiful. He talked about Dad, about the years the truck had served our family, and about the importance of passing practical knowledge to the next generation. Then he called Eli forward. "Frank believed machines die when people get scared to use them," Scott said. Dad had never said that. It sounded enough like him that most of my family nodded. Scott reached into his pocket, lifted the original Ford key on Dad's worn leather tab, and placed it in Eli's palm. "Beth and I want you to have it," he said. Applause began in 2 or 3 places and spread because people thought they had been invited to a happy moment. Eli started crying. Vanessa raised her phone to record. Scott turned toward me with a smile that was already warning me not to break the scene. "Beth," he said, "tell Eli what your dad always said about keeping a good machine on the road." I heard my mother say my name from behind me. I stepped between Scott and Eli, but I did not reach for the key. "There has been a mistake," I said. The applause stopped unevenly. Scott kept smiling. "We talked about this." "No, we did not." "Beth, come on." "Not here. You chose here." My voice was steady because the alternative was making a sound I would remember for the rest of my life. I looked at Eli. "The truck belongs to me. I did not agree to give it away." His fingers closed around the key as if he suddenly wished it were not there. Vanessa lowered her phone. Scott leaned close enough that only the people in the first row should have heard him, but anger made him louder than he intended. "You haven't driven it once in 3 years. Eli brought it back to life. That does not make it yours to give. It was supposed to be a surprise. A surprise is a cake. This requires the owner's consent." My mother pushed through the semicircle, moving slowly because of her hip but refusing Maya's arm. She stared at the key in Eli's hand, then at Scott. "Did Beth say yes?" she asked. Scott sighed as if 3 unreasonable people had interrupted him. "Joan, Frank would want the truck used. That wasn't my question." Eli held the key out to me. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm sorry. He told me you wanted me to have it after I graduated." I took it, and the leather tab felt warm from his hand. "You do not need to apologize for believing an adult who made you a promise," Scott said. "Can we please take this inside?" Vanessa's face had changed. She was no longer embarrassed for him. She looked frightened. "You said she approved the whole plan," she said. Scott turned sharply. "Vanessa, stop. You told me Beth wanted the handoff to happen with her mother here. This is not the time. You said she knew why it mattered to us." The word "us" moved through the driveway more clearly than any confession could have. I looked at Vanessa, not Scott. "What exactly did he tell you I knew?" She glanced at Eli, then at my mother, and I watched her decide whether protecting herself was more important than protecting the scene Scott had built. "He said you knew about our relationship," she said. Nobody moved. Even the children near the picnic table had gone quiet because the adults had. Scott reached for my elbow. I stepped away. Vanessa continued, her voice lower now. "He said your marriage had changed a long time ago. He said you two were staying in the same house for financial reasons and that you had agreed he could move on as long as he didn't embarrass you. He told me the truck was your way of showing Eli there were no hard feelings." Scott said her name again, this time like a threat. She shook her head. "No, you put my son in the middle of this. You made him accept something that wasn't yours." My mother was still holding a paper birthday napkin. The frosting from her cake had left a blue mark on her thumb. She looked at Scott with the stunned concentration of someone trying to make one fact fit inside another. "Were you sleeping with her while you were working on Frank's truck?" she asked. Scott did not answer. He did not have to. He looked at the garage, at Vanessa, and finally at me. The marriage I had described as good that morning was still standing in the driveway, but every person there could now see that Scott had been living by a different description. I asked Maya to take Grandma and the younger children back to the patio. She resisted until I said, "Please keep her birthday from becoming only this." Then she put an arm around Mom and told everyone the food was still warm. People moved because moving was kinder than staring. My brother-in-law turned the music on at half volume. I opened the garage door and told Scott, Vanessa, and Eli to come inside. I wanted witnesses to what belonged to them, not an audience for what belonged to me. On the workbench were labeled bags of bolts, a rebuilt fuel pump, and Dad's red metal toolbox. I had not realized the toolbox was out of the locked cabinet. "How long?" I asked. Scott rubbed both hands over his face. "Beth, we should talk alone. You prepared a public presentation. You do not get privacy as a way to control the facts now." "How long?" Vanessa answered. 11 months. That was 3 months longer than the restoration program. Scott said it had not been physical for all of that time. Vanessa said, since November. They had met through a college fundraiser. Scott had told her our marriage had become practical, that we lived separate lives, and that I did not care what he did as long as the bills were paid. I had once said something vaguely similar about $600 he spent on golf clubs after we had already booked a cabin. We laughed when I said it. He carried the sentence to another woman as permission. Did you tell her I agreed you could have another relationship? I asked. He stared at the concrete. Not in those words. You slept in my bed Thursday night. He glanced at Eli. Can we not do this in front of him? Eli's face hardened. You gave me her dad's truck in front of everyone. I'm already in it. That was when I understood Scott had not only used me to pressure Eli. He had used Eli to pressure me. A young man crying over the biggest gift of his life was supposed to make refusal look cruel. My mother's birthday was supposed to make questions look disrespectful. Scott had assembled enough decent people around a dishonest act that he expected decency to finish the job. I pointed to Dad's toolbox. Why is that out? Eli looked at Scott before answering. It was part of the truck. He said Mr. Mercer's notebooks and tools went with it. We packed some this morning. My throat tightened. Dad's notebooks contained 40 years of measurements, part numbers, and crooked drawings Maya used to color when she was little. Packed them where? Eli pointed toward his dark blue pickup at the curb. 2 boxes. I didn't go through them. Please bring them back, I said. Eli went immediately. Scott started after him, then stopped when I said, You stay here. I asked Vanessa what else Scott had promised. He said the truck would be Eli's graduation gift. He said Frank wanted a young mechanic to have it and that you chose today because your mother wanted to see it stay connected to the program. What else? That after the gift, we wouldn't have to pretend I was only helping with the project. Scott interrupted. I never said we were making an announcement. You said your family would understand once they saw Beth support Eli, Vanessa replied. You said if she welcomed him, she was welcoming us. I could see what the photograph was meant to do. Show me smiling beside Eli with Dad's key, then stand in as proof whenever Vanessa doubted him or my family objected. Scott did not need me to agree if he could capture an image that looked like agreement. Was that why you were recording? I asked. Vanessa nodded. He asked me to get the handoff. Scott protested that we were making the scene sound calculated. You put a ribbon on it, I said. Eli returned with 2 plastic totes, and Maya followed him. She opened one on the workbench. Dad's shop manuals were inside with his coveralls, inspection mirror, and the green ledger where he had recorded every oil change since 1989. On top was a printed sign, Frank Mercer Legacy Build, presented TOELI Reed. A college program logo sat in one corner. In the other was a photograph of Scott, Vanessa, and Eli standing in front of the Ford at a car show. Scott's arm was around Vanessa's waist. Where was this taken? I asked. Dayton, Eli said. In May. Scott had told me he spent that Saturday helping his brother replace a deck. The back of the sign thanked 4 sponsors and Scott Holloway and the Mercer family for donating the vehicle. This was printed before today. Scott said it was only a display copy, not a legal transfer. So you understood there was a difference. He had no answer. Maya reached for her phone, but I told her not to photograph anything yet. I did not want all of us turning each moment into leverage before we had lived it. Eli admitted he had driven the Ford to Dayton and 2 local events with Scott's permission. He showed me the pictures because he thought honesty might repair something. In one, Vanessa sat in the passenger seat with her hand on Scott's shoulder. The dashboard in another showed 412 more miles than the last photo Scott had sent me. He said you didn't like old trucks, Eli told me. He said you were glad it was going to someone who did. I looked at Scott. I did like it. You couldn't even sit in it. Grief is not disinterest. He said the truck was rotting, that he had done the work, and that Eli had earned it. Eli cut him off. I didn't earn somebody else's truck. You promised it. I asked Eli for receipts for parts he bought himself and said I would reimburse him after reviewing them. You should not lose money because Scott lied. You also are not taking the truck. He nodded. I removed Dad's key from the ring Scott had decorated with a blue bow, took the spare from the magnetic hook above the bench, and put both in my pocket. Then I stated the boundary. The presentation was over. Nobody would drive the Ford or remove a tool, part, notebook, or document without my permission. The program sign would remain with me. We would not discuss my marriage with Mom during her birthday. Scott could return to the patio and say he had made a mistake about the gift, or he could leave. He could not ask me to perform forgiveness or describe Vanessa as a family friend again. "You don't get to give me orders in my own house," he said. "I'm not throwing you out. I'm telling you what I will participate in. Any other conversation happens after Mom is home." Vanessa picked up her purse. Scott turned toward her and said softly, "Please don't make decisions right now." That softness hurt more than the photograph. Vanessa looked at Eli. "We're going." Eli asked if he could apologize to Mom. She took both his hands. "This isn't on you, honey." Scott had no right to promise it. Then he left with Vanessa. Scott remained in the garage and said he had never meant for me to find out this way. "You meant for me to approve it this way," I said. "That is worse." I carried Dad's ledger inside, washed my hands, and returned to the patio. My relatives went quiet, waiting for an explanation. I kept it to 3 sentences. "Scott made a decision about Dad's truck without my permission. The gift is not happening. The rest is private today." Then I cut Mom another piece of cake. The party did not become cheerful, but it continued. For the next hour, Mom was still 75. Maya still showed her pictures from Maine, and my brother-in-law still burned the second batch of chicken. Scott stood near the garage until the restoration guests left. No one applauded me, and no one dragged him away. The consequence was simpler. The truck remained where it was, and I did not help him turn stolen consent into a family blessing. Before Mom left, she asked me to walk her to the truck one more time. She put her palm on the hood and asked whether Scott had ever offered to buy it. I said no. Then he knew asking might get him an answer he didn't want, she said. Scott heard her from the garage but did not respond. Maya drove Mom home and called when they arrived. I stayed by the driveway while the sun went down, not because I was guarding the Ford from a thief, but because I no longer trusted the ordinary assumptions that had protected our marriage that morning. Scott finally approached and offered me the keys to his car, as though one set could compensate for another. I told him to keep them. He asked what he should tell Vanessa. "Tell her what you decide," I said. "Do not use my name as permission again." He nodded, then asked if we could get through the night before making permanent decisions. The practical wording almost pulled me back into our old rhythm. I said we could wait until morning to discuss logistics. We could not call what happened a misunderstanding until then. After the last guest left, Scott and I sat at opposite ends of our kitchen table. I asked what he had spent on the truck weekends. He guessed $4,000. Our joint credit card account showed upholstery, parts, 3 hotels, and restaurants in Dayton, Cincinnati, and Springfield. Charges tied to those weekends totaled $6,840. Some paid for legitimate repairs. Others paid for rooms he booked while telling me he was staying with his brother. "If this had only been about restoring the truck, you would have shown me the car show pictures," I said. He did not deny it. 2 hotel dates matched Saturdays when Scott had texted me photographs of Eli working under the hood. He had not invented the restoration. He had built the affair around real work, which was why his schedule had looked ordinary. I stopped searching for one completely fake weekend. The same project could be legitimate in the morning and cover by night. He described the affair as something that happened after years of distance, as if time had made the choice. When I asked why he still slept with me, took our October cabin trip, and discussed a kitchen remodel, he said he was confused. When I asked why confusion required a printed legacy sign, he said he had been trying to create a clean transition. "Were you planning to leave?" "I didn't know. You told Vanessa the gift would show our families accepted the relationship. I hoped once everyone saw how good Eli was with the truck, you would understand this didn't have to be a war. You started with a surrender ceremony." He accused me of turning every sentence into evidence. I stopped asking for a better explanation. Scott wanted the emotional benefits of being chosen by Vanessa, the practical benefits of staying married to me, and a public scene that made the arrangement look generous. The truck was perfect because he believed I was too sentimental to sell it and too grief-stricken to use it. He could sacrifice something of mine and call himself generous. Scott slept in the guest room that night. I did not lock him out or throw his clothes outside. The house belonged to both of us, and a lawful boundary did not require an illegal performance. I put Dad's notebooks and both keys in a small lockbox, and Maya took it to Mom's house the next morning. I called a flatbed company because I did not want Scott driving the Ford one more mile. A secure restoration shop photographed all four sides, recorded the odometer, listed the loose parts, and emailed an intake report. I bought a separate agreed value policy after the agent reviewed my title and probate documents. She explained that permission to drive a household vehicle did not grant authority to transfer it. On Monday, a family law attorney reviewed the same records. She cautioned me against assuming every financial issue was simple. An inherited asset could remain separate while marital money used to improve it might still be considered in settlement. We documented the truck and agreed I would not sell, conceal, or materially alter it until Scott had legal advice. Her careful answer was less satisfying than revenge and more useful. That week I also scheduled medical testing. The results were negative, with repeat testing advised for the appropriate window. I cried for the first time under fluorescent lights while a nurse with purple glasses explained a timeline I had never agreed to enter. Scott voluntarily moved to an extended-stay hotel 4 days after the birthday. Our attorneys documented the temporary arrangement so neither of us could rewrite what it meant. He took clothes, medication, golf clubs, and a laptop. He asked for the printed legacy sign because he was afraid I planned to circulate it. I said the people in the driveway already understood enough. I did not contact his employer, the car club, or the college to publicize the affair. I did email the automotive program director because the Ford had appeared at school-affiliated events without my knowledge. My message was narrow. I owned the vehicle, had not donated it, and did not authorize future use or representation. The director apologized, removed 2 online photographs, and sent me the participation forms. My signature appeared only on the original repair assessment authorizing supervised mechanical work. It did not authorize off-site shows or a donation. That was enough. Eli emailed a spreadsheet of receipts totaling $1,186.42 for parts he bought himself. He attached photos and offered to remove them. I reimbursed him from my checking account after my attorney told me how to document the payment. I was closing the one legitimate debt Scott had hidden inside his promise. Eli had worked in good faith, and the parts remained on my truck. He returned Dad's canvas coveralls with a note. Mr. Holloway said you wanted the truck to go to someone who wasn't afraid of it. I understand now that he was wrong about what fear means. I kept the note but did not answer. Vanessa contacted me once. She apologized for believing Scott, admitted she knew we still attended family events together, and said she had accepted his explanations because they gave her what she wanted. She also said their relationship was over. I believed the first half because it cost her something to say. I did not investigate the second. Scott's relationship status was no longer a fact I needed to monitor. Maya wanted to block her father and tell every relative everything. I told her she could choose distance, but she was not my investigator, messenger, or witness for hire. For a month, she spoke to him only by text. Later, they began having breakfast every few weeks. It hurt more than I expected. Then I remembered I had protected Eli from a promise he did not make. I could not demand that Maya pay for one she had not made either. Mom blamed herself because Scott used her birthday. She said she should have stopped him when she saw the ribbon. I reminded her that she asked the first useful question. Did Beth say yes? We repeated it until it became less about the truck and more about a habit our family had developed around Scott. He was persuasive, competent, and generous with plans. We had mistaken those traits for authority. At our first mediation, Scott apologized for the affair and for misjudging the truck. I asked what he had misjudged. He said he underestimated my attachment. No, you overestimated your right to decide what my attachment meant. The mediator let the silence remain. Scott eventually admitted he had chosen Mom's birthday because he believed I would not refuse in front of her. Once the key was in Eli's hand, he thought taking it back would feel cruel. The admission ended his claim that the presentation was impulsive. It also ended the part of me waiting for a kinder explanation. We began negotiating a divorce. There was no secret fortune or instant collapse. We had a house with equity, retirement accounts of different sizes, 2 cars with loans, and 25 years of financial life to separate. Scott kept his job, kept mine. The $6,840 in restoration and travel charges went into the spending review. Some amounts counted as vehicle improvements, others as personal affair expenses, and we compromised rather than paying experts more than the dispute was worth. An appraiser documented the Ford's value before and after restoration. My inherited ownership was recognized, while part of the marital contribution was addressed elsewhere in the settlement. I did not recover every dollar. Scott did not receive part of Dad's truck. Reality was less cinematic and more precise. 6 months after Mom's birthday, Scott asked through his attorney whether I would sell him the Ford at its appraised value so he could make things right with Eli. Even then, he imagined repair as a path through acquiring my choice. My response was one sentence: "The truck is not for sale to Scott." Then I closed the laptop and drove to the restoration shop to decide for myself what happened next. At the shop, I reviewed the first inspection again. Sound frame rails, unsafe brake lines, surface corrosion, and cosmetic choices Scott had approved without asking me. While the divorce was pending, I had authorized only safety work. Now I had to decide whether to preserve the paint, rebuild the transmission, or sell the Ford as it was. The shop waited for an answer instead of treating my hesitation as one. I asked for 2 budget-safe road use and a full show restoration and chose the first. I did not need a perfect truck. I needed to make the next decision myself. The shop manager was Marisol Vega, a woman who had restored old pickups for 22 years and had no patience for sentimental instructions that contradicted safe mechanics. On my first visit, I said I wanted every dent preserved. She pointed to corrosion near the left cab mount. "That one is not a memory. That one is a future floor failure." We kept the crease Dad made backing into a concrete post in 1997 and repaired the rust that could hurt someone. That became the rule for the truck and, eventually, for everything else. Preserve what was honest, fix what was dangerous, and stop confusing damage with proof of love. I did not turn the restoration into a sudden new personality. I still worked full-time and forgot the names of parts after Marisol explained them. Some Saturdays I stayed 20 minutes. Others I stayed 3 hours. She made me choose the seat fabric, approve the brake upgrade, and decide whether to rebuild the original 3-speed column shift. Kept it. Dad had taught me to move the lever with my fingertips instead of wrestling it, and I wanted to know whether my hands remembered. The first time I sat behind the wheel, I lasted less than a minute. Marisol did not offer a speech. She asked if I wanted coffee and showed me an invoice. 2 weeks later, I started the engine. It sounded rougher than memory and less sacred. That helped. The divorce moved at the speed of disclosures, calendars, and ordinary disappointment. Scott tried 3 versions of remorse. First, the affair was a symptom of loneliness. Then secrecy was caused by fear of my reaction. Finally, he admitted he had wanted 2 incompatible lives until the birthday forced them into the same driveway. That was the only version I respected, but respect did not restore trust. He asked to pause the divorce and attend counseling. I agreed to 3 discernment sessions because 25 years deserved a decision made outside the heat of one afternoon. The counselor asked what I would need to consider rebuilding. I listed full disclosure, individual therapy, no contact with Vanessa, and acceptance that Maya's relationship with him was not evidence about mine. Scott agreed quickly. Then the counselor asked whether he could accept that perfect compliance might not save the marriage. He was quiet for almost a minute. "Then what would be the point?" he said. The answer clarified more than the affair timeline. He still saw accountability as a transaction that should purchase an outcome. I ended discernment after the 3rd session. I did not hate him. I no longer wanted a future that required checking whether every apology concealed a bargain. Vanessa left her college position before the next term. I knew only because the director emailed to identify a new coordinator. I did not know whether she left because of the affair, the unauthorized displays, or an unrelated reason, and I did not invent certainty. Eli completed his certificate and accepted a fleet maintenance job. Maya saw that online and told me. I was glad for him, then asked her not to bring me updates unless something involved the truck. I was done collecting facts that could not change my decision. By winter, Scott rented an apartment across town. He and Maya settled into a careful relationship that did not include me. He attended her birthday lunch. I took her out the next night. At Christmas, she visited each of us separately by choice. There was no perfect family photograph and no pressure to create one. Mom started calling Scott by his first name instead of son. She was civil when he sent a card and declined when he offered to fix her porch light. "I have an electrician," she told him, then worried she had been cruel. I told her a declined favor was not cruelty. We were learning that a boundary did not need a villainous tone to be real. The divorce became final 11 months after the cookout. At the courthouse, Scott and I sat on the same wooden bench while our attorneys reviewed the last corrections. There was no Vanessa in the hall, no argument, and no audience beyond people handling their own cases. Before we left, he said, "I still don't understand why the truck became the point of no return. I could have named the first hotel room, the first lie, or the moment he carried Dad's notebooks from my house. The truth was less clean. The hotel rooms mattered. So did the lies and the notebooks in Eli's pickup. The birthday was simply when I saw they all came from the same belief. If I did not object early enough, Scott could call my silence agreement. The truck wasn't the line," I said. Handing it away and expecting me to smile showed me how often you thought my silence moved the line for you. He nodded as if he understood part of it. Part was enough. We exchanged practical information about the house sale and walked to different parking lots. After the mortgage and costs were paid, the equity was divided under the settlement. I rented a smaller place near Mom with a 2-car garage I could barely afford for the first year. I chose it because the Ford fit with room to open both doors. It was not my most efficient financial decision, and I do not regret it. Marisol finished the truck in June. The bill was substantial but manageable because I used part of my house proceeds and refused upgrades I did not need. She required 3 driving lessons on industrial streets before releasing it. On the first, I stalled at a green light while a delivery driver leaned on his horn. On the second, I ground the gears and apologized to the dashboard. On the third, my left foot and right hand found the old rhythm. I drove 6 blocks without thinking about Dad's last voicemail. Then I realized I had not thought about it and cried at a stop sign. Marisol waited without pretending not to notice. When I picked up the Ford, she handed me 2 keys on a plain steel ring. No ribbon, no speech. She asked me to sign a repair invoice because that was the one kind of signature the moment required. I drove to Mom's house first. She came outside before I reached the porch, one hand pressed to her chest. The paint was still meadow green, only cleaner and deeper. The coffee ring remained on the dashboard beneath a protective clear finish. Dad's toolbox was secured behind the seat, and his ledger was in my desk at home, not displayed as a prop. Mom walked around the truck twice. "Are you selling it?" "No." "Giving it to Maya?" "Not unless I decide that someday and she wants it." Mom smiled. "Good answer." I asked if she wanted breakfast. She glanced at the high passenger step and said her hip might object. I had bought a removable step and grab handle after checking with her physical therapist. It was the only surprise involving the truck that year, and it changed no one's ownership. She climbed in, settled against the repaired bench seat, and ran her fingers over the coffee ring. For the first mile, neither of us spoke. Then she said Dad used to shift too early when he was showing off. I told her Dad claimed he never showed off. She laughed so suddenly that I missed my turn. We ate at the diner where he had wanted to take me on that last Sunday. The building was smaller than I remembered and the coffee was worse. Nothing waited there to complete the grief. That was a relief. At Mom's 76th birthday, we held a quieter cookout in her backyard. No speeches were planned. Maya asked before taking a picture of Mom and me beside the Ford, and I said yes. My relatives did not treat the truck like a trophy recovered from Scott. My brother-in-law asked about the brakes. My aunt complained that the bench seat reminded her of cars without air conditioning. For most of the afternoon, the Ford was simply parked at the curb. That ordinary presence was the ending I had not known I wanted. Eli sent one final email the week before. He had found a small socket wrapped in cloth under the passenger seat during the restoration and mailed it back with one line. "This belongs with Frank's tools." I thanked him and wished him well. I did not offer him the truck and he did not ask. Accountability did not require turning an unfair promise into a delayed gift. It required letting the promise end. Scott and I spoke only when a tax document or old account required it. He never asked about the Ford again. I heard through Maya that he had left the car club. I did not ask whether Vanessa was still in his life. That answer could not change where I lived, what I owned, or what I had learned. Before the birthday guests left, Mom asked me to drive around the block. Maya climbed into the middle of the bench seat as she had when she was little, though now her knees nearly touched the dashboard. I eased away from the curb, shifted cleanly into second, and listened to them argue about whether Dad would approve of the new seat belts. For 3 years, I had treated the Ford as if using it would spend the last of my father. Scott treated my hesitation as if it erased me from the decision. Both ideas had kept the truck still. Scott had been right about one thing: it needed to be driven. He had only been wrong about who got to decide where it went.